This is the Bailed Out Podcast,
You have rights.
Nobody knows how to deal with the bureaucracy.
where we talk bail to keep you out of jail.
The only thing that saved me each time is I wasn't drunk.
Does that mean you're a really bad driver then?
Hosted by Sean Plotkin, a multi-generational bail agent and 5-star author. And John Roraba, a non-profit founder and attorney who has helped over 20,000 families.
We're not far right, we're not far left, we're very neutral, I hope.
Bail is the balance.
John, what is justice?
That is what the court system is there to establish.
Bailed Out is brought to you in part by searchandmate.com, Turning Leaf, and Angels Bail Bonds. Now, please welcome your hosts, Sean and John.
Thank you so much for listening to us. We're happy to have you over at episode 9. We're going to be talking about the softer side of bail and some of the warts that come with it. Today we've got, of course, my co-host, John Rohrbaugh. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here again.
And we're also having Stephanie Gomez-Tagley. She is a bail agent with Angels Bail Bonds, and I'd say she's kind of our office manager too. Welcome.
You can call me Stephanie because I know you just use my full name, legal name, which I never use. So thank you. Good to be here. Never been on a podcast, so it's definitely something I'm very interested in seeing how it plays out.
Excellent. And for me, I work professionally on the forfeiture side, and Stephanie manages the forfeitures for Angels Bail Bonds. So when something goes wrong there, I work with her, and we're going to get to some specific circumstances that we've worked with extradition when the defendant has left California. So, but first, I just wanted to try and get some of your experience of being a bail agent. How long have you been a bail agent?
I'm going to be coming on 5 years now. 5 years as a bail agent.
Wow. So how's the experience been?
It's been interesting. It has its good aspects, it has its bad aspects, but it's never a boring day. And I've learned so much. So I really enjoy it. I think it's given me a lot of life experience without it meaning to. And I think it's really been a good stepping stool for my next part of my life.
Yeah. Well, I think you might find with bail, it becomes so interesting that it's sometimes hard to get a next part of your life.
Yeah,
and you end
I've
up with
learned
bail
that.
the whole time.
I have a few coworkers that keep coming back. They've been working with Sean for about 20 years. So I agree with you.
Yeah,
that some people never leave, and it's always a part of it.
Well, very few leave. Once you're good at bail, it's hard to enjoy anything else because, it's just such a transformative experience to be able to work
really
with the families you do. But so do you have any specific stories that kind of stand out for you and your experience?
With extradition or just in general?
No, just your experience as a bail agent.
Well, why don't we backtrack just a little bit?
Did I get too fast?
No, you're doing great. I mean, you softened her up. She feels a little bit more comfortable on the air. Audience, extradition is when somebody doesn't go to court and then they take off across state lines.
Yes.
So it becomes a forfeiture. There's a warrant for their arrest, and now they're outside of the state. Right now, we're dealing with the case that's in Oregon with somebody that's out of the state, but we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
Let's talk about 5 years. We've been together quite a while for that, working together. I remember your sister was trying to get me to sign up for her payroll service, ADP. And then I wanted her to come work with me, and she's like, no, but I want to serve up my sister, right?
So she cold called you consistently until you answered the phone, and then you liked her consistency, so you told her to come in. And then you saw that she spoke Spanish, so you're like, "Oh, let me hire you." And she said, "No, I have a job." She said, "No, I have a job already." But my sister just moved out here not too long ago, so she's looking for a job to speak Spanish. So, and I just came in.
Where did you move from?
Temecula.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, I grew up in Temecula. I went to high school there. Went to community college. Did the whole thing there.
I love Temecula. The balloons, the parachuting. I haven't done the parachuting yet.
Parachuting, I've done it. But
have you done it?
Yeah.
Excellent.
But and then I just came in for an interview. I'll say interview because it really wasn't an interview.
Yeah.
It was more of a walk-in. Okay, you're gonna answer phones right away. And I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no script. It was just like, if the phone rings, you're going to answer it and you're just going to take the information.
Right.
This is like within the 30 minutes of my interview.
Well, it was more to address immediate customer service things. If it was bail oriented, then you'd pass it on to somebody more. Of course, you need to be licensed to be answering calls. So you weren't negotiating, transacting, underwriting.
If I remember correctly, it was all spam calls that came anyway. So I was like, thank God no one called, because I was so scared. I've never had an office job. I was a server before that. I was a head server at a sushi restaurant. And so I've never been on the phone like that, and it was really scary. But
interesting. And I think that's something about bail agents that I know a lot is they really value people who just figure it out on their own and do it.
Absolutely.
You've got to be self-contained because you need to be able to make decisions on circumstances that not only have you never seen before, but nobody has ever seen before. And you've got to make them
to that
quickly.
point. How much did you know about bail before you got thrown into it?
Nothing. I didn't know anything about it at all. I didn't know what it was. I remember my dad telling me about it once because I saw a bail bonds by my house, and I was like, I don't understand. And I lived by a jail, and I didn't know. And they didn't
Which jail?
I don't know. It's in Temecula, or it's in French Valley. I don't know what jail it is.
And what does your dad do?
He was a probation officer for a little bit. Now he works for the water district, but yeah.
Okay, so you did have some kind of idea about the criminal justice system.
Oh yeah, the system, but bail not so much. And I don't know if it's because he like sheltered me from it or what, but I didn't know what bail was really. And
then with probation, would he talk about his work at all at home for you to get an idea?
No, not really. He would. No, we were a lot younger when he was a probation officer, so he really tried to shield us from that. And it was he did that in San Diego, and then we moved to Temecula, and he stopped doing it.
So two things you mentioned that I think would be good to discuss is one, it was important to me when we had met that you spoke Spanish.
Yes.
How much of our customer base do you think is Spanish speaking?
I would say more than half. If any, I think a majority is more Spanish speaking, if not. So I think it's a very valued thing to be able to speak Spanish.
And then relationally, as you're trying to help understand the person that calls, and do you find that being a native Spanish speaker does help our clientele feel more comfortable?
Yes, definitely, because they call asking for a Spanish speaker, and if you don't speak Spanish, they're most likely just going to hang up or call somewhere else. They don't feel comfortable. It's a very stressful situation, and it's very understandable. So they want a friendly, common thing that you could hear, like a voice, like Spanish speaker. So
certainly, yeah. So I know my wife is a native dual language, but she still feels more comfortable in many subjects in Spanish and in other subjects in English. And her brother is just a couple of years older than her, got his education in English, and so it sort of flips around.
Definitely.
But that is actually very important that in that stressful bail situation that they need to communicate in not only a language that they understand, but also with someone who understands their cultural background and can be supportive in that moment.
Yeah.
You also mentioned a little bit about how when you started, you were at community college. And then, of course, during our 5-year stint together, you've gone on, got your bachelor's degree, and then now you're about to be done with your master's in criminal justice.
Yes.
Of course, elaborate about the free time to be able to do that, the fact that you're juggling a lot of stuff, but also what have you learned from education as it pertains to bail? And more so, what did you learn about yourself while dealing with bail that you didn't think you knew before?
I would say with the education, there's some aspects of it that I learned a lot of people's point of views, and it gave me a good alternative way of viewing things. I have a lot of police officers that are in my classes, so I hear a lot of their point of views, and I hear my professor's point of views, which are usually leaning towards more one way than the other. But it's very interesting to hear police officers.
When you say one way to the other, expand on that. What do you just see as the basic dynamics?
I have a professor that said that she helped write the Bail Reform Act.
Okay.
Thing.
Yeah.
And when she found out that I was in bail, she kind of just she didn't do anything, but she was kind of just that's interesting, but I've been treated differently because I did work in bail, and I had a professor who had a bail bonds business and and he was a criminal justice professor in Fullerton, and he kind of just snapped back at me when he asked me. He was just like, "Oh, how do you think about bail reform? You're gonna lose your job?" And I was just like, "Oh, I thank you for calling me out in front of the class." But it's very interesting to see how people see different things. But I have a lot of police officers there too who are firsthand people who deal with bail, who says they don't like reform, that they say that they feel like their job is redundant if they have to go arrest people and they're just getting released right after. And they're like, what's the point if they're just going to get released? So it's very interesting to see both aspects of it. And then me being in it is the third aspect. And I always try to share my point of view as well.
Interesting.
in my discussions and stuff, and people always find it interesting because it's very simple for a teacher to say this, and that without having any point of view from like firsthand experience.
That's actually a really interesting perspective. Can you think of any conversations or dynamics that you add in there that might be interesting to share?
Not besides the mental health one with people getting arrested and just being released that police officers are getting really frustrated with, and drug use ones because they're just ticketing people now for drug use. They're not putting them into custody, so they're just getting frustrated in the situation. So that's what I've learned. I've had a lot of police officers in my class, from San Diego to LAPD to Orange County Sheriff, everything.
But the police officers that are actually working with the defendants seem to understand bail better than the professors.
Exactly.
That are just,
Well, in a generic sense of they understand what bail's doing, by being able to hold them accountable or going back to court and stuff, and not just being released and stuff like that. So it definitely gives different perspectives. And then there's people that just don't have any idea that I'm educating in the same sense. So that's also really good. Like they don't know what bail is. So like me being there and like showing my perspective while they're talking about their perspective is able to educate people.
It's very interesting.
So,
That's
So
what
I mean, I still wanted to get back to what you feel you've learned for yourself by being in bail. But before we get into that, what are some of the biggest misconceptions or obstacles or biases that you think that you've seen that you didn't expect as a bail agent?
Obstacles and biases. Well, that's a really loaded question because there's so many aspects to it. But
have you experienced anything for being a bail agent that you didn't think that you would experience
from people in general, or jailers, or
the other perceptions?
Whenever I tell people I work at a bail bonds company, they're kind of like taken back because they have this weird perception, and it's like these like people that are taking money and they're just evil, and like I'm like a female Latina that's like doesn't look like what they would picture. So they're kind of just like, oh, that's weird. Like I never thought about that. So they already have preconceived ideas of what it is. And then they meet me in there and I explain a little bit more, and it's like always more lighthearted after. But biases on like someone being like upset that I was, or what do you mean?
We could even pivot away from that. I don't want to load anything. I want it to be more neutral. What do you think you've learned for yourself, life experience, that you can use beyond from bail?
What have I learned from life experiences in bail?
Okay, that's too vague of a thing. Let's talk about perception of jailers and how the jailers treat you, how not just general public, but jailers, customers, certain things that you have to do differently.
So jailers are very interesting to me because you never know what you're going to get. You're either going to get someone who's super nice and you're going to be taken back, or you're going to get someone who's really upset and grumpy that they have to even deal with you. I would say 9 times out of 10, I get nice jailers. But I also have learned to they don't get along very well with bail bondsmen. Not that they don't get along, but they don't really feel like dealing with it, like dealing with the paperwork of bailing someone out. They would process people in, but like taking them out, they kind of do like shift changes in between, and they're like, oh, no, you gotta wait. So shift changes when they're changing shifts between jailers or watching like the people in the cells. Right. So that could take about an hour, if so.
Or it could be an impending shift change where they're using that as a reason,
an excuse,
not to get involved, and then have the bail agent, by default, the parents or the people that are posting the bond, the indemnitors, wait an additional amount of hours.
Yeah, so with posting bail bonds, you got to wait till the jailers give you the green light to go. So that means being booked in, fingerprinted, their fingerprints coming back from the FBI database.
Right, and that's very important, before you release someone,
Absolutely.
you got to know who they are.
Right.
And I will say that throughout the years, the state has gotten a lot better at that. I used to have a lot more of the wrong identity cases that came through, or just somebody with no identity, and that ID, the auto ID system they use with the fingerprints is pretty good.
Why don't you talk a little bit about the bond that we had where it was a mistaken identity? Were you a part of that bond or no?
No, I wasn't a part of that one.
Okay, well, I guess that defaults back to me. We had a bond where a customer was claiming vehemently, this isn't me, this isn't me, this isn't me. And my bail agents, I called jail. I looked it up at the court, and they're saying that they're not going to release you unless you post this bond. It turned out to be $230,000, so it was $60,000. We ended up discounting it anyhow, and then the person got out and went to court, and they found that it wasn't him.
Right.
And then it was like, oh well, I paid this, and I know I owe that, but I'm not going to pay that. And it's like, yeah, could we nickel and dime them? No. Was it a bad beat? Yes. Did we take it on the chin? Yes. But the court system doesn't always get it right on the mistaken identity. So there is a good reason to be able to be having these the FBI database, to be doing the internet checks, and make sure that you got the right guy.
Right, because it gets complicated sometimes, particularly where you have
Or girl.
immigrant, yeah,
Or however you identify.
You often, if you have people that are born in another country, they may not have an FBI identifying file, and they often will come into the country and take someone else's identity so they can work, so they can get paid. And that person, when you can't get a label to the body, that's difficult. I had a case years ago where it was two defendants that were stealing mail, and they kept exchanging their IDs, and so one would get arrested under one name and then the other, and it was just so hard to straighten it all out, where they went, and particularly when you're getting into more of the sophisticated criminal organizations, they provide these IDs, as a
or
part
redundant IDs of the same one to be able to save themselves. So I mean, if you think of somebody like Mario Lopez, of course we all know Saved by the Bell, these big cheekbones and the dimples, but if you go look at LA County, no offense, but they probably have 3 or 4 Mario Lopez's, and how they identify it is the date of birth. And even then, there could be overlap. So
I had 2 equivalent Mario Lopez's in the same cell once. They posted a bond and released the wrong one. But the other thing that happens regularly is you'll have a good family member and a bad family member, and so the bad family member gets arrested and says, "Call mom and tell him I'm the good family member and to bail me out," and she does it thinking she's bailing out her good son, and she's just been deceived the whole time. It was the bad one that that snuck through.
Or was it really sneaky, but he thought he was the good one, or she was the good one?
He just thought it.
Self-selection.
What is identity? I try to explain to people that there's a difference between the label and the body. Did you have a body in custody that you bailed out on your bond with the wrong label, or was the wrong body bailed out and the labels don't matter? Because it's if you don't break it down to that, it gets really confusing, because one of the things that you're dealing with fundamental with bail is criminals. The most devious, the most deviant people that are in the system are being caught up with this, and they are trying to screw things up.
Yeah. To that, we are a 24-hour business. From being a 24-hour business, from your experience, what percentage of bail do you think we write from, let's say, 9 to 6, and what percent? 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 6 p.m. to 9 a.m.
I would say probably like 30% during the day.
30% during the day, about 70% at night.
Yeah, and that could fluctuate. I would say more. It's going to be nighttime most of the time.
Yeah. So 2 out of 3 are going to be at night. So since you've been on the other end of the phone call when a customer, and what would you say is our typical customer? Is it a mom or is it a dad? Is it an aunt or an uncle, grandma, grandpa?
It's usually
boyfriend.
It's usually
girlfriend.
It's usually their husband or wife for a domestic, or it's mom and dad for a domestic. So I think that's the most common. You don't really see a lot of children that are not children, but like the children of the people that are older.
Right.
It's usually like the really immediate, like either the husband or the wife, or what was the one I said?
The spouse or the partner.
The spouses or the parents. The parents.
The parents. Yeah. Well, and that's consistent with almost all arrests are 15 to 25-year-old men. So they're more typically going to have parents that are the most socially responsible person for them, or a significant other,
or grandparents.
Yeah,
too,
I mean that does happen sometimes, but you have to dig a little. They don't typically call. Right, they'll have like a granddaughter call that doesn't really know what to say, and they might even be underage.
I've had younger kids call for their parents, but they're just either translating, and they say, oh, well, she only speaks Spanish. I'm like, it's okay, I speak Spanish too. And then that makes it more comfortable. Like, okay, there you go. So, or people just calling for information because they don't want to expose too much in the information. So you just got to give them information and just say, hey, if you have any questions, we're up in 24 hours.
Right.
Like, yeah, I can speak to whom, because I know they're not the decision makers in that sense. They just are being the gatekeepers to be able to help their family.
But what's their attitude when they call generally? What's kind of
kind of scared a little bit.
Right.
Like unsure, untrusting. And then the number one line I get the most is, I've never been through something like this before.
Yeah.
This is my first time. And I'm like, I understand. Like, I'm not, like, there's no judgment for me that you're calling.
Right.
I think, which is what I think they're trying to portray, that like, hey, don't judge me, but like, I got in a fight with my boyfriend and he's in custody. And I'm just like, no, like, that's understandable.
Right.
These are the steps. Like, I'm not going to like say like, oh, what happened? Like, tell me the details. Like, what did you do?
There may be some instances where we do have to go a little bit
that's
into that, but that's for deeper underwriting.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, well,
so the first step though is to make them feel comfortable and to understand that they're at least talking to someone who's been through that circumstance and can help guide them in a way that's culturally comfortable for them.
And I will say there are people that share too much, that will tell me too much information, that I'm just like, okay, but where is he located? And they like tell me their whole life story. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, like I understand, but like, can I see, where is he? Like,
well, that gets into where we've said before on previous shows, you got to be like a psychiatrist and help them. And then there's other bonds, like yesterday, you had been helping me underwrite a bond where we had to push back a little bit, where the lady on the line didn't want to give information. We're like, look, please, well, I mean, why don't you go through what you went through to help peel the onion to help them get her out? I essentially
had to explain to her why I was asking her all these questions, because a lot of people don't understand the severity of what it means to be a cosigner. So a cosigner is you're insuring to be responsible for someone to be going to court. If they fail to appear, they're not going to court, they're not answering the phone, no one's answering the phone, the cosigner is responsible. So that's...
It's commonly known as an indemnitor or a cosigner or a guarantor. It's somebody that's financially responsible to make sure that that person appears in court. Yeah. And as we're educating the indemnitors more, or the cosigners more, some of them fall through. Like when we had worked through with this gal, and we had asked her what she would like, and we found a way to get her what she needed. Then she's like, oh, wait a minute. What was her response?
She said, well, I need to talk to him about it. And well, when I asked, because he was out...
the him?
The defendant.
So
a boyfriend of a number of years.
And that's the point too, that he was not in custody. She was just calling for him, and I was asking about information about him, and he was out on bail already for another case. So I'm asking information on who's the cosigner for that one, and she didn't want to share any information. She was just like, no, it's just me. Don't like involve anyone else. And I'm like, I gotta ask these questions. Like, I'm sorry, this is why XYZ. You know, you're trying to be responsible. You're a little bit younger too, so it's. You know, I do need to ask these. It's underwriting. Like, I'm sorry. And she opened up a little bit more. She told me more information. So it definitely took a little bit longer than usual ones.
Well, longer. What was it, like 4 or 5 calls?
Yeah.
Like 3 to 7 minutes each or something?
I'm able to shorten that up.
Of course. Well, I mean, that just comes with experience.
Yeah, during time. So it seemed longer to me, but she just wasn't really open to sharing her information.
So what do you like best? Do you like the underwriting part where they'll call you and they'll ask you the questions and you help guide them, educate them, and work with them through it? Do you like the transacting point where you meet with the family members and sign them up and get to know the family better and more of the relationship that it is? Do you like going into the jails and the posting element? What's your favorite part of bail?
Favorite part? I think it depends on the jail.
Oh.
So if it's LA County, no, I won't like that.
Well, you mean LA County Jail?
LA County Jail.
LA County Jail is the largest jail in the world. And if you are incarcerated and shipped there, you could be in jail for 3 years or 3 days, up to 3 days or even more if it's a holiday or something. Do you have any stories about that grind that you've dealt with in LA County versus Orange County versus sheriff's departments versus police departments?
I prefer police departments. If you tell me I need to go post at a police department, I will go 9 times out of 10 if I'm not busy. You probably won't let me leave the office, but I would volunteer myself to do it because it's so easy. It's so easy, and you just go, and they're out within an hour and 30 minutes. Sheriffs, it's a hit or miss depending on which one you're going to. I like Carson. Carson, you're out within an hour, 3 hours. LA County and Orange County.
Why don't you talk about a few other of the sheriff's departments? So talk about
Sheriff
maybe
Department,
Lakewood or Norwalk. Or...
Lakewood's a little bit more difficult to deal with. I'm not going to lie. Lakewood does take a little bit longer to book in, and they give you no answer on how long it's going to be for them to be released. Could take up to 6 hours. Walnut is the sheriff's department too. One. I've had good instances. I've once waited 6 hours for someone to be cleared. I waited in the parking lot 6 hours because their systems were down, so I had to wait.
So one of the reasons that we're going to get into a little bit about the delays that it can be is if you're a bail customer, you're going to be going, hey, is this, I paid them, or I paid a credit card and they ran it 3 hours ago. What's the delay? Yeah. Well, the delay is not us. We're there. We're waiting. Sometimes we're not supposed to be saying that. Well, bring donuts. Here you go, Sheriff, please. Or we'll find ways to try and get that stuff going to be able to get your loved one out sooner.
And really, I want to say that that's really the most important, in many ways, thing that bail agents give their clients is they have pre-justification with the courts. So as soon as that's filed, then the jail has to release the defendant. With other forms of security that you post that aren't commercial bail, the judge has to first approve the security, or they won't even take cash oftentimes. Sometimes it has to be a cashier's check. But even with a cashier's check, they have to make sure that it's a valid cashier's check, that it's not fraudulent funds, that it's a real government bond, right? Surety bonds get people out as soon as the jail will let them.
Once the bond is posted, the person is out, and that's that. But if you're subjected to the delays, there's an opportunity cost to being in jail. Everybody thinks jail sucks. It's the reason jail's there is because it's not fun. And if you're having to be at a job or you have some commitment or you have to do something and you're stuck with factors out of your control, that's another reason to argue for commercial bail. What concerns did you face, or what, I know when I would go out and do postings, I'm a dude. I think I'm gung-ho, whatever. But as a single female chick going out at midnight, 2, 3, 4, 5 a.m.
Wow. I did. Yeah.
What about the fears? Was it fun? Was it?
I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I don't work night shifts as much as most people, but when I did, I'm going to a police department, so I felt safe because I'm going to police department. I'm not going anywhere weird, a dark alley or anything like that. Usually I meet them in the parking lot. I never had a weird experience where...
When you say meet them, meet the defendants or the indemnitors?
Or both.
Both. Both the police department, the jailer, the defendant, the indemnitor, everyone. Because for nighttime, I've gone to people's houses before, but only if I feel super secure with how they are. But for the most part, it's during the day. But I usually have them meet me at the police department for 2 reasons. 1, it's safer. 2, they know you're legitimate if you're going to police department where the person's being located. So you're if someone's giving you $5,000 cash, you don't really want to say, hey, meet me at the Starbucks 2 miles away. I need you to fill this out. Oh, I'll let you know when the bond's
posted. Not just that, but also, I remember there was a bond where I knew it was like a $200,000 bond, and I had to go into South Central, and it was, I think it was a Crip, and I was going to be collecting somewhere around like $16,000 in cash, and it wasn't just the fact that do they think I'm legitimate? Does somebody else know that somebody's going to have $16,000, and once I'm paid, am I going to get that taken away from me and get hurt?
Well, and I told you the story of my wife, who was a bail agent at about her age, was making a deposit at the bank and had someone steal the money and take it from her, and it was an inside job. It was somebody that
it usually is an inside job, right?
And it was I think it was the boyfriend of the teller or something, where she'd been making all these big deposits, and they chased him down and caught him, it's just dangerous to be in those circumstances with that population and with that amount of money, in by police departments, and often rough neighborhoods where the police departments are.
I've felt that pressure a little bit, but not too much where I've actually been scared. I've just been more aware of okay, I have cash, I need to get this done and I need to go. I can't linger. I can't.
Well, that also goes back to Solomon here at Podcast Place in Long Beach. Thanks for hosting us. He had asked Stephanie, hey, well, where's your blazer and your bail agent? It's like, well, there
I did ask that.
There are some bail agencies that do that, but in protecting my staff, This is why you see her as she is. She's wearing a beautiful little black shirt with roses. And it's, yeah, it will make the customer feel a little bit uncomfortable. Like, why is this person dressed like like a college
what?
girl?
Like an attractive,
Like a
young
college
woman in
girl.
college,
Like
right?
But
You
it's
know?
more for their safety because we don't know if people are going to go, oh, bail agent, oh, that person may have a gun. So maybe let's bother them. Or they may have money or
Right.
cash. So let's bother them. So there is a certain amount of, hey, I'm just an everyday person. And because she
Right.
dresses like an everyday person in dealing with the jails, sometimes she gets, well, you go into that.
Yeah, I've been treated a lot nicer because they think I'm like a damsel in distress when I walk in, and they're like, "Do
Right.
you need something? Like, are you okay?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm here to post a bond, but now that you're here, like, I don't need to call you." And they're like, "Oh," they're like, "I kind of got trapped
I
into
got
like
slimed.
hell." Or like, I'm just waiting for a person to get released, and I'm like outside, and it's getting dark, and there's officers going in and out because they're getting off, and they're like, "Are you okay?"
Right.
And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. I've been waiting for this guy to get released. Oh, let me make a call." They're like, "Okay," because they see that I'm outside like by myself.
Right.
So I have learned to dress differently, like to be able to be treated differently as a civilian. Not when I say differently, I mean not wearing my bail stuff, my bail shirt.
Right.
And like,
well, because you need to interact with, there's a comfort work in
Yeah.
bail that I think most people don't understand. You know, that first part of the call, people need to process verbally sometimes. And
Yeah.
just listening when they're in stress lets them understand their circumstances better. And especially if you can listen in their native language.
Yeah.
I promise, if no matter how good I got at Spanish, if I'm in trouble, I'm going to want to process in English, right? You know, I'm just, that's so you know that, but that's
John,
that's a
I
big
argue
part
you
of
would
it.
find a way if you needed to be fully Spanish. At some way, I know you can.
I hear you, but it would be the most stressful thing in that circumstance that I
Yeah.
had to do,
Yeah.
right? And when you have to make accurate, critical decisions with
Life-changing.
life-changing and with remarkable pressure of the state, you know, with your loved ones at stake. There's huge stakes at that moment in time. You've got to be able to process in a way that's comfortable to you.
So I think we're hitting on 30 minutes. I want to, we could dive into something else, but I think we should probably go maybe another 10 minutes more on the softer side of bail, some of what you've experienced. And then perhaps subsequently, then we'll dive into some of the pitfalls that we've experienced, perhaps with some of the forfeitures, extradition that we wanted to talk about for what should lead into episode 10. So speaking of stress and you dealing with the stress of it, Stephanie, with the softer side, what guidance can you give to people to help them feel more comfortable calling a bail agency on what you think would be the most relevant things that they should be asking you or giving you so that they're not like, oh, I got to go find a bail agency and I don't know what they're going to ask. And I'm thinking it's some old guy that doesn't speak Spanish and like,
like basic information that
like, but not just basic info, but I mean,
what to look for.
what would you guide them to be able to ask a bail agency or how to feel softer?
I have had calls of scams of people getting scammed with bail, so I think it's a good topic for people.
That's a great one, and we should talk about
I've
a few of
had
those.
two
Yeah.
instances now, and I've been able to help people with
Tell
them.
me what you mean with being called a scam for bail.
I had an older grandmother call me.
Right.
She said that someone called her and said that they needed to post bond for her grandson within a period of time, or he wasn't going to be eligible anymore, something like that. And they couldn't talk to his parents about the case because of some disclosure information, and they called her. And then they heard a recording. She heard a recording of her grandson of him saying that he was in jail. But it was like a drug. It was very like intricate, and they said they needed more than 10% of the money. So she went to the bank.
And in California, the most you can charge is 10%. And most bail agencies are not even allowed to charge 10%.
Yeah.
There's
Some
a
still
15%
can.
rate
Yeah.
filed,
Okay, well, there are filings for 15%.
but nobody charges it. I've never heard it.
And I think 12% on smaller. But
For the most part, it's
with the Department of Insurance, they really like to make sure that you typically don't deviate more than 10%.
so it was $100,000, and they were asking for 15 grand. So
Yeah,
she didn't really question it. She was scared. She went to the bank. tried to take out the money, and her bank was like, no.
Actually, this bond I think was a referral to us. But
It was a
from someone.
referral. It was
So
a
this
referral.
wasn't even one of somebody that contacted us from our own, but because we are able to do harder to write bail, or we're willing to work on bonds where with bail reform, many bail agencies don't have the time or the wherewithal or the structure to stay in business to answer the call 24 hours. So we get a number of bail agencies that call us as a referral to have us do the bond.
Yeah.
Just in that scenario, was there someone in jail that needed to get out, or were they just
So at
like,
this-
Oh, she's going to get into that. It gets juicier.
At this point, I'm just like, okay. So she's telling me the story, but after she spoke to the other bail agency who referred me to her,
Right.
she wasn't answering the phone, and I was just
Right.
like leaving her voicemails, and then she finally got on the phone with me, and she's telling me this whole story, and I'm like, something sounds weird about this. I was like, it doesn't sound normal for anyone to reach out to you within the police department, detectives,
yeah.
anyone to tell you that you need a post bond for him.
right,
That's not common.
right?
So then I'm looking for the guy online. Can't find him anywhere. He's on the system. And I'm like, I'm spelling his name right. What police department? Nope, no one's there by that name.
Wow.
So I'm going back and forth, and I was like, this is an old woman who's really scared and was just like, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do my good deed. I'm gonna figure out this thing, even though there's not much information.
Right.
Did a background check on the guy, found that he goes to a college in San Diego, because she didn't know any information. She was an older woman. She's like,
Right.
he goes to San Diego. I don't know his birthday. I don't know his middle name. And I found him on Facebook, and I was like, is this him? And she's like, yeah, this is him. Found his phone number. I called him, and he's like, I'm in class. Like, no, I'm not in custody.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, can you please call your grandmother? Like, please just call your grandmother. Like, she's freaking out. She thinks you're in jail.
Wow.
And he's just like, yeah, who is this? I'm like, my name's Stephanie. I work here, but call your grandmother, please. And she's like, which one? I'm like, the one in this area. He's like, okay, hangs up the phone, calls her.
Wow.
And tells her, Grandma, I'm fine. Like, I don't know who's scamming you, but it's not me. But her bank told her not to be, they didn't let her take the money out.
Good. Yeah.
So,
Well, that's good.
and she called me a few weeks later to thank me. She's called me like 3 times.
Did we ever get a positive review out of that?
No, but she's an older woman. She called me 3 times.
Well, you could get the grandson to leave the positive review.
She's calling me off her landline. Like, she calls me to speak to me for 10 minutes just to say thank you. And I'm like, no, thank your bank. Like,
Well, what that
right?
reminds me of is I have a friend whose father lives in Jalisco, is a farmer there, and 3 times now when he's gone back, somebody has stolen his identity information and called saying they kidnapped him, trying to get ransom. When he's just still traveling down,
It's common,
it's a
I've heard it common in Mexico.
Yeah.
But I don't know how they're using voice things like that to be able to really like convince people.
that
Well,
is
I mean, if you
scary.
just call somebody's cell phone and like, hey, leave a message, then you can get at least 10, 15 words
Yeah.
from that.
But back to what your original question was that I would answer for things that they should look for in other companies. Just basic information, I guess, to have if they're able to find the person,
Right.
first and last name, birthday, location. If they don't know the location, at least county-wise, Orange County, LA County.
Date of birth.
Date of birth. A lot of people, like that woman, did not know a lot of her. She even like joked, and she's like, "You're making me sound like a bad grandmother for not knowing this information." And I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to like narrow it down for you. Like, there's a lot of people with this name. It's very common."
And that's
Yeah.
a point I wanted to make, is that most people don't understand, is there's often a geographical distance
Yes.
between where the defendant is located and where the indemnitors are located. How do you deal with that?
she was up north. She was up north. She wasn't even around. No, she was in Downey. No, she was in Downey, and he was in San Diego.
How many bonds would you say we have out of state indemnitors or family members that are?
Out of state?
Yeah.
Out of 100%,
Yeah.
I would probably say maybe like 40-ish, 40%, 30%.
Yeah, so
Decent
you'll
amount.
find that we have to, and so it's going to be
30%.
even harder for that person that's out of the state to be able to go in, not post a bond, but put up cash or whatever. So we are facilitating
Yeah.
Right.
nationwide response.
Are you talking about like if the indemnitors are out of state, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
40%. That's a
They're
huge
30 to
number.
40.
I think it's a little
Third
bit,
of
somewhere
them,
between
yeah.
20 to 40, but yeah.
Yeah.
It varies. Some months we don't have any, and then some months we have 1 or 2. So
Well, that's got to be scary for the family member that you've got, one of your loved ones in a completely
yeah.
different place that you don't have any physical connection
well, you
to.
don't know
maybe.
you don't
Maybe
know
they're
the
in
system.
college.
You don't know how you're going to be able to do it because you're in a different state. And you feel so helpless. So we do have ways to send forms like electronically. So that's
Sure.
the way to be able to do it, but just still not being able to know. And then a lot of the times we don't even know when people get released when the bond is posted, because it's whenever the jails are.
Yeah, so
releasing them.
there's times we're not going to just sit there after they take the bond. That we're
No,
going
like
to sit
L-
and
LA
wait and
County.
wait, unless, of course, it's a condition that we place upon release. But usually the defendant can come to our office after, or DocuSign things, or I mean, also you are a notary. I mean, you
Yeah.
want to explain a little bit about why you're a notary, how that's useful, or do you want me to
Yeah.
help expand further?
Yeah, you can explain that one, because
So a part of a notary is to make sure that you are verifying that the person that's signing an agreement is who they say they are. So to most bail agents should have a Notary Public as well. And it's a good way to be able to make a side income if you're being a traveling notary for loan docs or the such, which you haven't really used. But if you wanted to set aside business for that, that's something that a lot of people do to be able to augment their income so they can be going to school for their college degree or master's degree and be able to have a side business while making coin, working with the bail agency. Other aspect,
Something I wanted to say about that too, that's with COVID and the pandemic, you know, there's less of that personal connection and more electronic in the bail process. You know,
just
what has
general.
that been like, you know, in this last couple of years in that
It's
transition?
ironic that you're saying that, because he's really been pushing for us to be more electronic based.
Right.
I like meeting people.
but also
face-to-face.
relational.
I like to meet people face to face, because you get a better feel for what kind of people they are. Whenever
Right.
I send an agent to go post for me, I always
Right.
ask, "How's the family? Like, was there anything weird?" And they're like, "No, like it's." But we do electronic postings electronic documentation.
No, but he's talking about keeping the social fabric, being able to have that relationship that has been lost with COVID. So like the things that we've talked about for doing the Vibe board, trying to get Vibe meetings on, or
so
keep a connection of humanity.
We're moving forward. If they can't meet up or because of COVID or anything like that, we're trying to offer like Zoom calls to be able to face interact.
Right.
Because all you hear is a voice over the phone. You don't really know who the person is. So that's probably the best way we've been trying to. But for the most part, I've still been meeting people. I'm not a big fan of sending.
There's nothing better than boots on the ground, but that's not always a possibility.
But it's more of a control aspect for me, because I want to be able to control it to be done.
Well, and something, you know, I mentioned in the last episode is the nature of the decision a bail agent makes is very different than the nature of decision that government pretrial makes, because you're trying to see if you are willing to take your company, have a risk
assessment
for this person, right? And what would happen if they fail to appear, whereas courts are trying to determine what conditions and penalties do I have to impose now to try and prevent that failure
But
to appear.
I would also say that the court is trying to do a risk assessment if there's they're supposed to, security threat to the community.
Well, that's true, of course. Yeah.
So
very important
in
for
the
that.
same way, I think there's different risk assessments. Ours is more obviously like, oh, are you going to run away if we don't go to court? And there's
let me step in for a moment. I think we should have key takeaways, and then close out episode 9. We could start working on episode 10. This is a great segue to get into the elements that we want to talk about episode 10. John, what are some key takeaways that you've taken away from today?
You know, I was really struck by, you know, the emotional connectivity that Stephanie and what I've seen with bail agents make when people are in a very vulnerable circumstance and they need to be listened to. They need to get accurate information because they need to get one of their loved ones out of jail and back into a situation where they feel a sense of control again. Yeah.
Stephanie, what did you take away from this episode?
Take away from my points?
Well, I mean, we did expand on. You get to, so I often don't have my own idea until I put it out in the air, and then I hear myself speak, which of course everybody loves to hear themselves speak. But then I'd be able to interact with both of you, and then go, oh yeah, that I did say that, but why did that make sense? And that really is a good point, huh? And then you go self-fulfilling. So was there anything that reverberated to you as a key takeaway from our discussion that you would want to reiterate and harp further for our audience?
I think a key takeaway, I think I didn't really realize how much I've done since I started working with you.
Yeah.
So I think it really made me realize that I've come a long way. And I think it's also a good way to show people that this job you can do with like going to school and working full time and making a side hustle. So I think I think it really made me realize how much I've done.
Yeah, no, I love having you with me, and I think it's more than a side hustle, but we'll
Not
get
a
into
side
that
hustle,
later.
it's
Yeah,
my job.
yeah.
Everyone that I've
Okay.
met amongst Sean's hive mind is highly motivated and accomplished. I really appreciate that from everyone that I've met in your world.
Maybe 1 in 5 of our customers are from out of state, and how there's a large amount of fraud, and how to prevent the fraud by using certain tools that are proprietary to make sure that we're going to make sure that a defendant goes to court. What was the tool that we used to be helping through the grandma to be saving her out of the 15 grand?
I use Delph Point, which is a background checks stuff, so basic background. And I would be looking through addresses verification. I do credit checks too, so I match up what their application says, like their jobs, their cell phone, their addresses, their past addresses, and how their credit is, obviously, as well. So I do underwriting in the sense of verifying who it is, as well as like pictures of their IDs, their credit cards, matching, and everything like that.
Yeah, to that point, there is a certain amount of, we do have to ask questions. We do need to trust but verify. But it's not only for the benefit of ourselves to make sure that the defendant's more likely to go to court, or that the indemnitor is going to be financially solvent to be able to make sure that there's skin in the game, as Joe,
John.
John, what is my name?
John?
not John. His favorite
Nicholas
term.
Talib.
No,
I'm not kidding.
our previous guest that we had on the show,
Topo.
Topo
Yes,
loves to use the
Topo.
term "skin in the game."
Yes,
So
yes,
in the process of underwriting the bond, making sure there's skin in the game, it's not only for us as the bail agent and the surety company by default, but also for the parents, the grandparents, the indemnitors, because there is a large amount of fraud. And as we start asking questions and starting them through our proprietary systems to be getting extraneous information to cross-reference what we're given to what we see, then we can weed out potentially fraudulent bonds. There's been bonds where, like Stephanie had just mentioned in the previous episode, a grandma almost lost 15 grand and her grandson wasn't even in jail. We've had bonds where people in Jordan that are giving us information and it turns out not to connect, so we don't do the bond. We've had people that want to pay cash but don't want to be giving information to cross-reference. So not only is it running credit, we get a lot of pushback on people like, well, why do you need to check my credit? And it's like, well, it's not because we want to look up your skirt. We actually need to help make sure that this thing is going to work for you and it's going to work for us, and it's going to make sure that we're not going to have a forfeiture risk and you're not going to end up having a needless $100,000 liability if the person you bail out. So
I'd like to also add that it gives them more of a reality check as well. That it's like, wow, they're taking these steps. I got to take this more serious if I am co-signing for this person.
Yeah.
So it's like credit check, application, contract, all these forms that are showing all these like things that you're going to be tied to until this case is closed. It kind of gives them like, okay, this is real. This is not a joke. I really have to be involved in this.
The formality of it is really important.
There's
There's really a formal decision that needs to be made, and that underwriting decision for bail, is all about the skin in the game, because you're putting your own skin as well.
Yeah.
Now, are you a fully liable agent, or do you just work off Sean's liability?
I believe it's.
she's on
Does
the
she
tape.
have to pay?
It's not.
That's okay.
It's not on me. It's not on me.
You don't have to pay that,
I just
okay.
write the bonds.
But I'm in the office, so she hears me bitch loud enough, so she'll be tighter than I am. And that's usually good, because if you're the big bear that has to pay the porridge, you're going to make sure that the little bears are doing the job and
ironically,
doing what they need to do.
I'm the one who has to deal with forfeitures, even so. If I write bad bail, it's going to come back on me anyways. It's more work.
Right. Well, to that point, I mean, we have another female agent, Maiken, who's she's been in it 20 years or so, but she's pretty tight to make sure that it's done right, because she knows she's going to come back to me. We're going to go, well, what about this and that, this and that, this and that? Why didn't you do this? And how was that? And she's like, oh my gosh, I should have done it right the first time. So there is a certain amount of checks and balances to make sure. But getting back to what we were discussing before, I had like 3 good things that we could have talked about, but let's segue into what happens when a bond goes wrong. And if we find often with domestic violence is if there's a girlfriend and a boyfriend, or a husband and a wife, or a husband and an ex-wife, sometimes the defendant gets out and they don't even sign the bail bond agreement where they are guaranteeing that they have to appear in court. Sometimes it's just the indemnitor. I know Stephanie likes to use the term cosigner. I don't really like the term cosigner, because in real estate terminology, that's someone that's separate from the initial contract, as almost as an addendum, where there could be an additional risk being termed as a cosigner versus an actual indemnitor of the contract.
You threw out the term contract. contract. Contracts always need consideration. And so, what is the consideration of the bail contract? And it's the release of the defendant from custody. It's the defendant that benefits from that. The surety is like a cosigner, but all cosigners are indemnitors. The bail agent is an indemnitor as well, because they're fully liable agents. You're not technically an indemnitor on because you don't have, you're not fully liable, but he is along with the cosigners. So they're cosigning with you in that extent. But the benefit is coming both to the defendant, and I argue it also comes to the family, that the family has a right to have their loved ones with them during the period of prosecution. That there's a family right there that you're defending. But the primary benefit of the contract, the consideration, the thing of value, is the release of defendant from custody.
No, I tend to agree. However, that's a different argument to make if I end up needing to pay that, and then that's right.
But you're going to be a cosigner and an indemnitor as well. Most bail agents are fully liable, or at least the acting bail agent, is, and you're getting somebody else from the family to take this ride with you. That's very different than government pretrial or judges that are just trying to say these are the conditions that will control you.
Absolutely.
It's like, these are the people I'm going to go on this risky adventure with. Does anybody ever lie to you in that process?
All the time.
Let's get into that in a little bit, but I do like where you went with John.
Before you move on, I use the word cosigner because a lot of people don't know what indemnitor means.
Good point. All right.
That is the only reason I use it.
Is there a Spanish term for that?
I don't think.
I think it maybe garantizor.
Garantizor, maybe.
Garantizor,
yeah. But no.
But you do bring a good point, John, that ultimately it's the county it's the state, and then it's the county, and then it's the surety company, and then it's the surety company who typically either goes to a bail agent or a general agent. I work with the surety company who is the general agent. They are Allegheny, and then I'm an agent under them, and then Stephanie is a attorney in power of attorney. No, attorney in fact.
She's also a bail agent. She's a bail agent.
So I would be too,
under your supervision.
Right,
bail
but I'm liable to the surety company. You're not liable.
You're only liable to the surety company because you've signed a contract with the surety company. You also signed an indemnity agreement to cover all of your bonds.
Right, but I'm saying on the power of attorney for the bail bond face.
Right.
Because there's two parts to a bail bond when we turn it into a judge. There's the bail bond face, and then there's the power of attorney, which is given by the insurance company, and we turn in those two papers, and that's what helps to make the release. On that power of attorney, Stephanie signs a section where I believe it says attorney in fact, and you are what is an attorney in fact?
So that's just like an agent. It really is it's kind of a fancy term that people like, but that's just somebody that you've authorized to do something.
Like
agent is the better word. For that. But an attorney in fact as opposed to an attorney at law, like if you're going to give a power of attorney for like medical things, then you're an attorney in fact. So it's just one of those confusing words. People like to use it because it uses the word attorney and it makes them feel more special.
So back to what we were talking about with the warts and all, and the underwriting and making sure trust and all of that. Why don't you talk about one case that we have right now where we have a defendant that's out on custody. He did not sign the bail bond agreement. The ex-wife did sign the bail bond agreement, and now the defendant wants to be the indemnitor, and we had sent him information to fill in, and he did not follow through on filling in that information. And now that defendant has left to Oregon and isn't willing to come to court.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about this. So let's get some of John's insight to mastermind this.
I just want to clarify that I have had no forfeitures, and this is not mine.
Thank you.
Just to clarify.
When you mean no forfeitures, none of the bonds that you have underwritten the defendants failed to appear in court?
No, as of now, no.
That's not exactly true. We did have a bond
as of now
with a famous radio DJ
no, we're not even
that
gonna
went
go.
to Canada. Do we want to talk about that one first, where you had helped us through that?
One, and I will start the story with I did not want to do that bond, and I got written approval from him to do it. So it was not me. I was kind of just like, oh, he's not from here. And
well, he was related to a famous radio disc jockey.
How are you gonna play both sides to it?
Okay,
You're gonna say so. But that one wasn't so much of a flight risk. It was a lot to do with COVID restrictions, his visa getting rejected and not being able to come back.
And health
the
benefits from Canada.
Yeah, he got sick while he was here,
but
he was a Canadian citizen. Can you imagine wanting to go back to Canada to for your medicine, because it's free, right? So he went back, and then because the case had been filed, they revoked his green card and wouldn't let him back in.
But from my understanding, from what he said, I don't know how true it is the victim, I'm gonna say victim in the situation, was calling detectives and telling them that he wasn't there. So like they'll let immigration know and like everything. So like she did it on purpose to like make sure he couldn't come back. That's what I heard. And there was communication with the lawyer. Like it wasn't a total like he left, we don't know where he is, like kind of situation. It was more so we couldn't get him across the border, and the judge wanted him here. So it's like we can't play what side, because I've learned immigration and criminal justice do not really speak to each other.
Right.
It's very, very hard for them to speak to each other, and it's like you have to be in the middle to like hold their hands to like say, hey, this is what's happening, and then you have to spend money to show it's.
And sometimes, like in Mexico, it's the Mexican immigration that we're working with as well that will bring people back here. But your defendant in Canada, he wasn't able to come back.
Yeah.
But he had left, and so that $50,000 bond was going to be forfeited.
Forfeited.
Yeah. And he did retain counsel, a really nice, knowledgeable attorney who went and tried to do his own motion, but he wasn't an expert in it, and there could have been a problem.
Well, totally. Well, it turns out that the notice of forfeiture that the clerk of the court has to mail to you, the date she signed it was within the 30 days she had, but the postmark on the envelope was several days later. And so I was able to do a motion and get an exoneration despite the fact that the defendant had left, because the courts are required to tell you as soon as possible when the defendant has failed to appear. And if they don't meet certain time limits, then it's not fair to you because you can't catch him. He's gone before you can catch him. So a large part of what I do is making sure that the court gave the proper notices to the bail agents and sureties in a number of different circumstances, so that it's fair to be able to impose that liability and to maximize the chance of the defendant being brought back to court quickly. Because that's the real purpose of bail, is to get defendants to appear in court so that justice has a chance.
Yeah, consistently, not just the first court date.
Exactly.
Which is another thing that people don't
But
understand.
that's a huge difference in my practice. There are two categories of cases. One where the defendant showed up at least once, and that's by the time they come to me about a third of them. And then the other 2/3, the defendant just ran as soon as they got out, and they never showed up. Those are the ones that are generally the problems.
Ironically, I'm the ones I have now. I only have 2 right now, and they've been going consistently. And it just, something happens and they lose their ID, and it just keeps going and going. Anyways, back to the Oregon one, though.
Well, even before that, one segue that you had mentioned that I think is important to address is we had, sadly, we had a $70,000 bond where the loved one paid the premium. And once the defendant was released, she knew full well what could have happened. We didn't want it to happen, but we didn't have any control. ICE picked up our defendant once out of bond on ours, and then he was put into ICE custody.
As soon as walking out.
As soon as walking out. Have you experienced any of that yourself that for stuff you can talk about?
Personally, no. I've heard stories. I've had cases where I have a defendant who's been going to court consistently, and then ICE takes them.
Right.
And then,
and they used to do that more often. They were actually would get. So one of the problems that California did is it stopped reporting most of the ICE holds to the sheriffs. They became sanctuary city, essentially a sanctuary state, and so immigration responded by just following the criminal justice system, seeing when defendants were bailed out, and when they would go to court, they were stalking the courthouses, right? And they'd pick them up and they'd send them out. Now, from the bail agent's point of view, if the government takes someone and deports them, we're able to get an exoneration of the bond.
In the perfect world, because I'm pretty sure you helped me with this one too, because he was going to court for around 2 years, consistently, and then I don't know where he got deported, and the criminal justice system was like, "Hey, where is he? He's not here." And I'm like, "Oh, he got deported. Here's his alien number," and they're like, "No, you need to do a whole motion,
Exactly.
and you need to find out where he's at in Mexico and prove that he's there. And I'm like,
Right.
but you guys, I'm like, why? Like, you guys, like, are we not all the full government? Like, why can't you communicate with immigration?
Well, here's the
that did
difference.
this?
Yeah, exactly. They're not the full government.
Yeah.
No. You have the burden of proving
I
to
know,
the court.
yeah.
You know, exactly.
The
They
burden
were
of proof
deported.
fell on us.
And it's slight. So what'll happen sometimes is the defendant has been previously deported and snuck back in.
Yeah.
And then if he's caught again by the immigration, sometimes they don't have a good record that they just picked him up and threw him back.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can find that record that the government forced him to leave, then you can get an exoneration. But if the defendant just snuck back over the border and then he gets arrested, gets bailed out, and then just decides to go home, even though he can't come back, he caused the problem, and you have to pay the forfeiture. So it you know, sometimes you know, whether or not the liability occurs you know, determines on very small things. But the bail agents promise the defendant is going to voluntarily appear in court.
Yeah.
If instead they go to Mexico, the bond has been breached.
Yeah.
Yes, which gets back to trust and personal accountability.
Right.
As we underwrite, we try and make sure that the defendant and the indemnitor or the cosigner know the contract and understand better what they're getting into. But we have a case that right now where a defendant is in Oregon and he had hired an attorney, and then the attorney had worked out a deal. The defendant, to his choice, chose not to agree to the deal.
Right.
But he's still not appearing in court. We're a number of months in. He thinks he didn't do anything wrong. He's got a warrant out for his arrest. He's a fugitive.
Right.
We've been trying to communicate with the defendant, and more so the indemnitor, since she's the one that signed the contract for him. And she's trying to say, well, I'm not involved. And he's taking care of it. And that's not the case. So much so that we forwarded an email from the county attorney's or the county district attorney's office saying that you are extradited. And we are communicating all the way through. Hey, take it more seriously. Hey, we have a right to come get you. Just come to court. I mean, let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I don't think they fully understand how serious it is, even with the email. We literally send them email that says, hey, they're saying we can go pick you up.
Not just that, we're putting the name of the person that sent the email, the contact. If they don't believe us, they could contact that number,
and that was
that
a big
email, and go direct and say, oh, yeah, this really is a problem. I am a fugitive, and they are allowed to come get me.
And that was a big thing with that case in particular, is that they didn't really believe me, and they don't really believe the severity of the case. So even showing that, like, hey, I have a district attorney that's emailing me that's written proof that they said we can pick you up, there's been no response from them.
And it's a $50,000 bond. This is
Criminal.
I think, a $50,000 criminal, and it's part of the special victims unit. Like, come on, like, where are you thinking that this isn't a problem, and where's the accountability to it?
And yet it's a misdemeanor.
No.
Oh,
No, it's a felony.
It's a
Yeah.
felony.
So there's a distinction with misdemeanors and felonies. There's an older system that was set up in the 60s called the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act.
Yeah.
And almost all states have that. And that if it's a felony charge, most states allow anyone to arrest somebody on information that they're a fugitive felon from another state and surrender them. And then they're held for an extradition hearing, which California decides whether they're going to, you know, actually pick them up and so forth. But you have to have the defendant surrendered in the state, like in Oregon here. And then Oregon conducts an extradition hearing, which really determines that this is the person that's wanted, and the identity is the, you know, is the key part of that, and that the state still wants them, and there's a whole process that's set up there. But most states, because of the Uniform Criminal Extradition Act, anyone can arrest that person without a warrant. We have another process in California with a statute 1305G that if you can find a defendant in that circumstance and have him identified by the police and the DA doesn't want to extradite, you can get an exoneration. But if they do want to extradite, the bond guarantees the cost of the extradition. So when the defendant comes back after an extradition and it's timely, the bond gets exonerated, then they issue the cost to the surety to pay the cost of those extraditions.
Even if we're the ones who extradited him back?
Absolutely. You know,
but what costs are they getting?
Well, because the state has to undergo the extradition. Extradition's a formal process that's done from state to state, and there's different costs. But every bond in California also guarantees the costs of extradition.
Which goes back into, we talked on previous episodes about fugitive recovery. I know that Topo doesn't like the term bounty hunting, but instead of just pulling the trigger to send out a fugitive recovery agent, we are trying to take every step possible to communicate the severity of the case so that we could save the time and energy and the pain to the indemnitor, the ex-wife, who claims to be not at all involved with this person anymore. And she keeps saying, well, I'm not involved. And then when you spoke to the defendant, he was so disrespectful and condescending and didn't really think that it was real. Bail agents deal with a lot of flack that it's not known. Talk about some of the pain you experienced.
Well, in this circumstance, probably one of the rudest customers I've ever had. He like cussed me out on the phone, but it was just more so because I wanted answers. It's been like 2 or 3 months and he wasn't giving me any answers. And I was like, you didn't take this serious. I'm showing you all this information. He wanted to treat it like, talk to my lawyer, don't talk to me, it's not my problem. And then I talked to a lawyer, then he fired his lawyer. And then he's still saying it's his lawyer's problem, even though he doesn't have one anymore. It's kind of like passing the buck to someone else without dealing with it. And then he just like yelled at me and I was just like, you know what? You lost your phone privileges. I'm not going to be answering the phone for you anymore.
Yeah.
We're going to be having everything written down because of how you're communicating.
Well, and it's a reality check because, you know, a criminal prosecution is very serious.
Yeah.
You know, the whole dynamic and the failures to appear in running, it makes everything harsher when you get back. If they have to drag you back. Especially
the time, how long it takes. So if he's coming up on 5 months.
Right.
So the fact that when he gets back into court, they're going to be like, where have you been these last 5 months?
But the bail agents are annoyed with him.
Yeah.
The judges are annoyed with him. The prosecutors are annoyed with him. Yeah. His defense attorney is annoyed with him. He's going to get a much worse deal than he could get if he just was able to adjust the reality that this is happening, right? But people don't want to.
Well, there's also a time element involved. We had a bond. I think you came in. Maybe you were there during that, where we had a fellow that spent the time at a casino in Vegas, had a marker, was fed a lot of drinks, and bet large, and then went home.
Super Bowl, right?
Yeah, it was during the Super Bowl. He bet on the Super Bowl, and he went home. And when he got home, the casino's like, hey, you owe us this money on the marker. He didn't feel that he owed the money. And they ended up getting a judgment. They ended up showing that he had, and I'm not going to speak to this but the specifics of it, but he needed $1 million bond. And he was in Ventura, and they extradited him back to Vegas, and he had to be in handcuffs in a van, and it was a 3-day process, and he was stuck like, oh my gosh, I need a bond, but I'm over here, and then now I got to wait for this. I don't have any control. So if you leave things to the last minute, nobody is in a rush to really get you out, and you could be in a worse situation than if needed. And then, I mean, it's an interesting case because as far as the premium, we ended up taking a Ferrari in collateral to guarantee payment of the premium.
Still have it?
No. My friend Jamie at Carmart OC, he was kind enough to let me store it in his warehouse. It's a covered warehouse. You don't want to have a Ferrari that ends up with a paint chip or nick or somebody drive it. So I wanted to make sure it was bonded and insured.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in negotiating,
I don't think I'd fit in it anyway.
Yeah, but in negotiating with this client, it goes back to an accountability and a realization like, hey, there is cause and effect, and you do need to take things more seriously. And that's part of the reason that commercial bail, even though it is easier in a lot of ways, we're not just to shrink with an indemnitor to make sure that they're comfortable doing the bond and educating them, but also we are an extension of the law to say, hey, this is something serious. Take it seriously, and we have to help, like almost like a defibrillator, like clear, like bring them back to reality.
Well, so one of the oldest cases that people deal with in bail is Taylor versus Tainter, a United States Supreme Court case where it really established that the bail agents are another jailer. They are a jailer of choice. They are the jailer that the family chose. And so the consideration of the bond is the state has transferred its custody rights from the state to the bail agent. So you have a right to use force to bring people pulled back to custody. If you don't want to be liable anymore and you want to surrender them, you have a right to use force. It doesn't take new process. It's a part of the existing process.
And when you say the term use force, this is where, as we talked about in previous podcasts, where we're working with fugitive recovery agents that are not in it about power. They're not in it about being able to have a gun. As I had explained before, somebody would interview and brandish their weapon in front of me, and I'm like, "Hey," he's like, "Oh, so I get the job?" I'm like, "We didn't even start the interview. You're not coming in here," because it is about over communicating, educating, empowering the people to be making the best decision possible, rather than using the power to force them to do something against their will. Does that happen sometimes? Yes.
Yes. Fundamentally, if a person needs to be, put in handcuffs and escorted back to the jail and put back in, that's within the power of the bondsman.
Yes.
But that is the difference between bail and when you're dealing with a lot of the law enforcement is bail agents do everything they can to avoid force, simply because force is expensive and risky. And bail agents are minimizing that. But when it's necessary, that's why it's it's important to use. But bail agents also get the advice of the loved one before they have to use force. So if force is necessary, it can be directed and minimized. And that makes everybody safer. It's very different than the response from police who, when they have fugitive recovery, go in effectively with SWAT teams to protect themselves, because they don't have the inner knowledge and their priority, as it should be, is their own protection. Yeah.
It's funny that when you said that Taylor versus Tainter, I remember when my mom, who was divorced from my dad, when they were fighting, they're both bail agents for 40 or so years plus. And she used to work for a company in Van Nuys called VC Van Pool Bail Bonds. And I was like, 8 or 9.
Oh God! I didn't know she worked for them. I used to hang out with Lisa Potter next door.
There we go.
Yeah.
And so I'd be 8, and I'd say some snippy remark, and they physically had a jail inside this bail office, and I would have to be put behind the jail, and I'd go, "Oh, what is this?" Or I remember when I'd be like 4 years old, and I'd steal something from a grocery store, like a piece of candy, and I'd giggle. And she had this relationship with the jailers at various police departments or sheriff's departments, where I think I've been conditioned to be behind bars at least like 10 times with my mother to teach me about tough love, not to make bad decisions. Maybe that's why I've been arrested so many times subsequent. I'm just so conditioned that I'm used to it.
And just that perspective of understanding, what that experience is like helps give you, an empathy, a compassion. I do think, it's harder. A lot of bail agents have had a interaction with the law that they got through at a young age, and then they were able to get through it.
No, I've never been pulled over or been any kind of trouble, so. I'm an outlier in that sense.
Well, it just means you got to live a more fulfilling life.
No, you told me last time that I live a boring life because I've never been arrested. He says that means you're just boring, and I was like, that I follow the rules? No. That's what he said to me.
Depends on the rules.
He talked to someone else who got arrested, and he was like, "See, we know how to live, not you." And I was like, "Okay."
Well, how are you going to know what you're missing unless you give it a try?
You know what? I'm okay with missing this out. I'm good. I'm good. I'll set this one out. I'll believe your stories.
Some of our best moments come after some of our worst. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I think we're at a tail end. Is there any key takeaways that we want to talk about from the warts? I mean, what do we do in this situation? I know I want to get closure, and we'll finish up podcasting. But what do we do now?
I think that contrast between what it's like when you're first trying to get someone out of jail and you're in the middle of that crisis, to then when it's like when they fail to appear and they're gone and they're not coming back
and they're not cooperative. What would you recommend we do with this particular fellow in Oregon?
You remind them of everything she said at the beginning, right?
Well, we've done that, and that's going nowhere. What do you think's next?
Well, at some point you have to use force, right? And you send investigators and you arrest them, but sometimes it's useful to file a lawsuit against the indemnitors first, just to get them the attention that it's real.
When's the last time were you ever on something to be going to recover a fugitive?
No.
You want to end up coming with us to Oregon and have an experience?
I might.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
might be
we
fun.
were
We
thinking-
could do a remote.
Well, you know what we may
remote,
do is we may
cast.
have a follow-up to this where we'll have a company-paid event to go to Oregon and a
We'll take
case
Topo.
study.
It's because
Topo.
we
That could be fun.
He's not
Yeah.
gonna be hard to find. He's gonna be at home, just doing his regular life. Like,
Yeah,
he just
you
does,
know.
it's a pride, arrogant thing that he just doesn't want to come back.
I have been,
Which is why I wanna go.
Played a part of a whole bunch of fugitive recoveries, but I have never seen it.
Me
and
neither.
that is sort of scary.
Me neither.
Yeah, it could be fun.
A lot of,
Yeah.
yeah, it certainly
I want to
sounds fun.
go. I want to see him face to face.
All right, so let's see John's schedule. Try and get it in the books, and let's plan a company-paid trip to Oregon
Yeah,
and have fun with it. That could be
Yeah, that does sound fun. Uniform criminal expedition. actually.
see it in the flesh. All right. So, are there any key takeaways that we've talked about with the warts and the underwriting from this episode?
I learned a lot actually right now in the conversation, the extradition, that we still might have to pay for stuff for an extradition, even if we're the ones doing it.
Yeah.
Well, even if we pay for it, then we go to the contract, and then we try and get a
I know,
judgment
but
and garnish wages and all this other stuff to make it harder for the client. That's not an optimal path. It's about
This is my first extradition from a different state because everyone usually, the DA usually tells us no, they don't extradite, like the one in Mexico. We just had to do a
Right.
motion to show that he was there. Haley Corman, we just had to show that she was there. So
No, let's not name names.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Yeah. That,
I think you mumbled that name.
no, it's
Yeah,
okay.
that's
Sorry. Sorry. It's hard to forget these people's names.
I know
They're
they get etched in your mind
they
because
get
you're like
etched in
these are
your
a part of
mind.
part of your life. You care. You want to make
I
sure they
could
do the
probably
right
name
thing.
all of them if you asked me to because of how they just stay
I
ingrained.
had too many.
Yeah, I know you've had more than I have. But in the 5 years,
I think I've looked at. I tried to estimate how many files I've reviewed, and it's over 50,000.
wow.
Well, you don't often ask Gandalf how many battles he's fought and who are the people, so we're not going to go there with you, John. What are some key takeaways for you, Gandalf?
Oh, thank you. Well, it's just interesting to go through that extradition process with her
Yeah.
and how that works, and it's been balanced for with many years. Actually, Topo and I did a lot of that work with the legislature, and I really like the way California balances the incentives to be able to maximize making sure people actually appear in court.
Yeah.
And my clients only pay about one judgment for every 1,000 bonds they write because they do a good job at making that evaluation at first, and then if they fail to appear, their skin is in the game, and they do what's necessary to get defendants back, to do it by avoiding force, and that allows the criminal justice system to be balanced and work properly.
I tend to agree. Thank you so much for listening. Listen to us on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, wherever you listen. Remember to follow, rate, review, subscribe. This podcast is made possible by Angels Bail Bonds, attorney Leaf and Search Inmate. Bail Out is produced by Quinn and Devin at Steady Creative, as well as Solomon, and recorded live at Podcast Place in Long Beach, California. Thank you, Solomon. If you have any questions, give us a call at 844-BYE-JAIL. If you ask for Stephanie, I'll give you 5% off of the bond.
Is that her commission?
If you had
No,
What number did you give?
that'll be a good way to attribute it. It's 844-BYE-JAIL.
Oh.
844-BY-JAIL. Also, if you have any bail questions, you don't want to talk to anybody because you're more the introverted type, not unlike I am, you can check us out on Amazon. I wrote a award-winning book on bail to educate you. Get bail, leave jail. John wrote the foreword, a very, very nice foreword. And thank you so much for listening. Stay classy, Long Beach.